TSX-V.com podcasts.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com podcast, looking at cannabis news, stocks to watch, as well as insights from thought leaders and experts. In today's podcast, we look at announcements from the Supreme Cannabis Company Incorporated, trading on the TSX as FIRE and the OTCQX as SPRWF, Green Growth Brands Incorporated, trading on the CSE as GGB and the OTCQB as GGBXF, TRUL Cannabis Corporation, trading on the CSE as TRUL and the OTCQX as TCNNF, as well as Enwave Corporation, trading on the TSX Venture as ENW. So starting with the Supreme Cannabis Company Incorporated, who announced today that select brands will be available in Quebec, Newfoundland, and Labrador, expanding Canadian distribution to all 10 provinces. The company has entered into a letter of intent with the Société Québécoise de Cannabis to supply 7-acre products to retail stores across Quebec, and on November 21st, the company entered into a formal agreement with supply Newfoundland and Labrador Liquor Corporation with 7 acres high-end cultivars. With increased packaging capacity, we're pleased to have the recreational supply necessary to serve new consumers in Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador. As we enter 2 new provinces, we continue to benefit from the strength of our experienced sales team, said Navdeep Dhaliwal, CEO of Supreme Cannabis. In anticipation of our 7 acres brand entering these priority provinces, we specifically launched strains with East Coast consumers in mind. So with the addition of improved bottling capacity at 7 acres and both internal and third-party pre-roll manufacturing capacity, the company looks forward to providing a steady supply of premium cannabis products to both markets, and as Supreme Cannabis transitions to 100% recreational sales, it's well positioned to successfully supply all 10 Canadian provinces. So Supreme Cannabis now in all 10 provinces. I've mentioned this before, but basically that's a necessity now for almost any Canadian producer, as they should be entering into all provinces by this point. And really, this is a good example of what's been slowing a lot of these companies down. Packaging, manufacturing capacity, their pre-roll ability. If you've been paying attention to sort of what's available SKU-wise on the Canadian market, depending on the province, there's still a very limited amount of pre-roll options. And again, if we're comparing this to more established markets in the US, we know that pre-roll and dry flower sales are still having a steady impact on the market. And as far as pre-roll sales, there's still a significant component of most recreational sales, depending on which markets you're in. But really, even the vapes and edibles and beverages and all of that still are only accounting for a small percentage. And again, even with the sort of data that we've looked at before, most of the people are anticipating, and most of the data suggests that a lot of the people who are currently using dried flower and the pre-rolls and all that aren't simply going to transition to the edibles and derivatives markets. They're probably going to stay there, but hopefully the edibles and derivatives brings in new consumers. So realistically, expanding their sort of production capacity is going to be a necessity for most of these companies. Again, the Canadian market, as we know, population-wise, is so significantly small compared to the U.S. market that for any company to not be in all 10 provinces is going to be really difficult to actually establish yourself as a brand and actually create sort of any sort of market difference. As well, Supreme Cannabis here doing something that a few other companies are also focusing on, which is transitioning to 100% recreational. And really what we're starting to see, at least for the Canadian market, is companies focusing much more on medical or much more on recreational and really sticking to one side of the fence. The companies that are focusing more so on medical are also focusing on that on an international scale, so looking at medical supplies for both the EU and other international markets. That's why they're sticking with that. The ones that are sticking to recreational now are really focusing on making sure that their products create a brand in the Canadian market as fast as possible. And again, there is competition now going to be coming in from US companies, which will really affect sort of what's going to be happening with pricing as well as quality moving forward. But just again, a good example of sort of what's going on with the Canadian producers, the non-massive producers at least. Supreme Cannabis is sort of in a medium-sized category. And a lot of those companies of the same size, again, are really focusing on, again, one side of the fence, recreational and medical, and also focusing on getting themselves into every sort of avenue in the Canadian market so they can actually establish themselves as a consistent brand versus just a one-off strain option. Next, looking at Green Growth Brands and MXY Holdings LLC, who announced today the termination of its proposed business combination as the market adjusts to the changing macro environment. We're aggressively growing our businesses across America, and we drive to become a leading cannabis retailer in the company, said Peter Horvath, CEO of the company. While we continue to open collaborating with other industry leaders, we need to ensure that we're focused on building our operational strengths, maximizing our returns, and most importantly, avoiding excessive dilution to our shareholder base. So GGB is continuing with an aggressive growth strategy in both the MSO and CBD businesses. The MSO business now includes a 47 dispensary rollout in 3 key states, and the company will continue its expansion in the line of businesses, opening its remaining 45 dispensaries with the same speed and energy it dedicated to its North American CBD network. As the market evolves, the attractiveness of our know-how, genetics, and premium quality products in multiple states presents many opportunities as we actively grow our business and strengthen our relationships within the cannabis industry leaders, said Jordan Lambs, Moxie's CEO. So there is no break fee to be paid in connection with this termination. Green Growth Brands has agreed to repay the advance of $5 million by January 1st and to reimburse Moxie's $4 million in deal fees on or before July 1st of 2020. So Green Growth Brands, again, even in the US, you're starting to see a focus on what's actually working, as again, the industry in general, so many people focused on vertical integration and focused on how to be basically have a hand in every sort of element of the industry. We're now starting to see that there's some successes of that strategy, but that is not a strategy that works for everyone, especially as this market sort of evolves and matures a little bit. So even a Green Growth Brands now focusing on less partnerships with other companies and simply focusing on what they're doing with theirs, again, maximizing their returns and avoiding excessive dilution. And the excessive dilution is something that's really affected the industry so far. And now we're starting to see, again, the smarter companies at least seem to be backing off of that sort of proposed concept and moving towards, again, really just focusing on what's building out their revenues, what they can actually see as realistic goals for the next couple of years. And again, not trying to spread their focuses too thin, as again, many early companies in the cannabis space did, especially in the CBD space as well. And Green Growth Brands has had a really good success story with their CBD programs. They're probably one of the more established when it comes to having a retail footprint for their CBD products. They're in actually a lot of different actual pharmacy and legit retail outlets as opposed to just CBD and cannabis themed retail, which has sort of put them apart from a lot of the other brands that are out there right now. And now they're really focusing again, as he mentioned, on their MSOs, so those 47 dispensary rollouts in 3 states. And again, just starting to be an interesting trend that even the US companies, which have maybe been a little bit more consistent or different than some of the Canadian companies, are also now really starting to focus on keeping their company sort of even for the next couple of months. Next, looking at TRUL Cannabis, who announced that it will open the doors of its 42nd Florida location on Thursday, December 19th in Orange Park. And this milestone location comes days after TRUL, Florida's largest medical cannabis operator, became the first licensee in Florida to surpass 40 locations. So currently, TRUL operates 41 other dispensaries throughout the state of Florida, including the nearby communities of Jacksonville, St. Augustine, and Palm Coast. And the latest storefront, located at Blanding Boulevard in Orange Park, supports the company's mission to expand and ensure safe, reliable access to patients statewide. Since opening our first location, we focused on delivering strong, customer-centric experiences in every community we serve. As a result, we've been fortunate to develop a passionate patient base, and our continued growth is due in large part to that relationship, said TRUL CEO Kim Rivers. Expanding across and throughout Florida and offering patients a wide selection of inventory that they've helped develop is part of our strategic vision. So whether someone is starting the journey towards relief or seeking a new treatment, a well-trained staff is ready to assist patients at every step of the process, and they encourage all patients to reach out and find out more. So TRUL will be hosting a grand opening on Thursday, December 19th, and will offer press tours of the new dispensary immediately following. In stores and online, patients will find Florida's largest selection of THC and CBD products available in a variety of delivery methods, including smokable cannabis, concentrates, tinctures, topical creams, vaporizers, and more. And TRUL also offers home delivery statewide for patients and convenient in-store pickup at its 42 dispensaries and locations. TRUL has been heavily focused on the Florida market. As far as Florida compared to some of the other U.S. states right now, as far as the developing cannabis market, still almost entirely focused on medical. And as far as the actual regulations, it's still quite strict. So that's why there's only a handful of companies really operating in the Florida market. But the ones that are operating quite aggressively in anticipation of changing regulations, as again, population-wise and sort of community or culturally wise, Florida looks to be a very potentially lucrative state for the cannabis industry. especially even for the medical market right now. They have seen a lot of success. And again, having over 42 dispensaries in the state shows that there's a room for sort of aggressive growth. And also TRUL specifically with their success of offering home deliveries. I've talked about that a couple times in the past, that they're one of the few companies that does that, and it's also shown and helped separate them from a lot of the competition in Florida. As again, there's only a handful of companies really operating in that state, but the ones that are all sort of vying for dominance right now. And TRUL is definitely looking to be ahead of the pack right now, at least when it comes to already signed patients that are with them, as well as, again, sort of separating them brand-wise from some of the other dispensaries. They've had a lot of success, and they're quite a well-known company in the Florida area. So that'll be one state to keep aware of. Again, right now, there's only a handful of companies, again, sort of fighting for the top. But once regulations do change, if that is ever expected, that market could explode quite aggressively, as we saw with Nevada. Comparing to the California market, Nevada is almost in direct competition with them. So Florida has that potential as well, and even some of the other states. But as far as what might be the next potential huge one, Florida is definitely one to keep an eye on. And lastly, looking at N-Wave Corporation, who announced it signed a royalty-bearing commercial license agreement with Responsible Foods to produce radiant energy vacuum-dried snacks ingredients using premium Icelandic raw materials. So these rev-dried applications will be sold in both domestic and international markets, and under the terms of the licensee, Responsible Foods purchased a 10-kilowatt commercial rev machine to initiate production in Iceland. So the licensee grants Responsible Foods the exclusive right to produce and process a variety of unique and healthy food products in Iceland, including but not limited to dairy products, seafood, meat, microfoliage, and seaweed, and a variety of herbs, berries, and mushrooms native to Iceland. So these REV trademark dried products can also be sold as ingredients or retail consumer products around the world. And the licensee is the first signed by N-Wave in Iceland and 36 worldwide, further providing the value proposition of REV trademark technology as a tool to create innovative premium food applications. So REV trademark technology, I know that their N-Wave I've talked about several times before, but they've signed a few massive deals with some of the Canadian producers and as well as some US producers and as well a lot of international food companies. So them as a technology, even though they're not solely focused on the cannabis market, are starting to have a big impact on the cannabis industry. We'll start to see if they become sort of the technology of choice when it comes to vacuum drying the dried flower products. Again, I think they have a couple deals right now that you'll start to see in the next couple of months as far as what the results were of that. But moving forward, especially as we move into the Cannabis 2.0 products and we start adding in consumable products to the industry, N-Wave looks to have, at least their technology side, looks to have a huge impact on the industry moving forward. And again, the success of them in international markets could also have a huge impact when we're looking at the EU and Latin American communities and other parts of the world that are starting to also look at derivative products. Again, their technology has a huge possible potential impact on the industry. That's all for today's podcast. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.